What's up, world? I'm Nathan, also known as the Rising Phoenix. So many of you have been asking me, hey, what are these experiments that you've been doing when you come to Streetbeefs and doing these fights? Well, what's this all about? Well, to make a long story short and then make it really long again, I'm creating a martial art based off of quantum mechanics. And now many of you may be asking, okay, dude, why? Very, very simple answer. Kung Fu has been getting its collective ass kicked in MMA, and unless someone makes it viable, it's in danger of dying out. And the reason that it's not viable right now is, in my opinion, comes down to one particular thing. There is a very old tradition, and I'm not talking like centuries old, I'm talking millennia old, thousands of years, where it was considered, even to this day, dishonorable to actually strike your opponent, right? Even Jackie Chan talks about it, right? Like, that's one of the reasons why he doesn't like MMA, is, because he claims that it's brutal and, this, that, or whatever. And that's one of the reasons, just one of the reasons why Bruce Lee came here to the United States, is because he couldn't actually get that live resistance that he was looking for. He came here, amongst other things, to further that practice, to mix martial arts, right? That was his thing. That's why he came here, amongst other things. So before we kind of get into all that other stuff, let's just kind of talk, basic physics for a second, and then I'll segue why I think this is something that will work. Alright, so let's talk physics, alright? So we have dimensions, right? First dimension can be expressed just as a single line, right? Now, if you want to break out into the second dimension, you have to come perpendicular to the first. Boom, boom, like that. Now, if you want to break out into the third dimension, you have to come perpendicular to the other two, right? And then so on and so forth as you go up through higher dimensions. Now, really fun thing about physics is the way that electrons, move. You've got like an electron right here on this side of the barrier, right? And then you've got the same electron over here on the other side, and it's just like going back and forth instantaneously. Why? Well, quite simply, it's coming perpendicular to our 3 dimensions through the 4th dimension, and so on and so forth, however many dimensions it can actually move through. Potentially all of them. Who knows? And so, the other fun thing about that, the way that electrons have to move, let's say this here is an electron, right? And this, my elbow here, is the nucleus of an atom. So now it's tethered, right? So electrons can't just turn like you and I can 360 degrees and just be at their original position, right? Because whenever it turns 360 degrees, it's here like this. It has to rotate a full 720 degrees in order to make a full rotation. And so that is how it is moving around an atom, right? Now, this is a toroidal shape. Now, what is a toroid, you might be asking? Well, this right here, this nifty little contraption, this is a toroid shape. Now, the fun thing about this is if I take my left hand and then my right hand and I turn them both to the left, it kind of closes this thing out. And now you can see that there's this vortex going on, right? Now, God, I could do this for hours. This is so much fun. But yeah, so you can see how it just kind of, drives itself forward. This, vortex on this side, and it looks like it's all going willy-nilly, but it's also very organized and, honestly, gorgeous. Now, this toroid is something that we see a lot throughout our universe. Any electromagnetic field that exists is going to take on this toroidal shape. So we're talking about the electromagnetic field around an atom, the electromagnetic field around the Earth, even our auras. Yes, we have auras, but it's not something like super mystical or whatever. We emit our own electromagnetic field, and it takes on this same toroidal shape here. Now, many people believe that it's also the shape of our universe, essentially this donut sort of vortex thing. So yeah, that's this orbit around the electron, or I'm sorry, the electron orbiting in its orbitals around a nucleus, is a toroidal pattern. And I find that interesting because we live in a fractaline universe. Now, what are fractals? Fractals are a larger pattern that when you break it down into smaller is just the similar repeating thing. Okay, well what's that? Here you've got your hand, a bar, which then spreads out into 5 smaller bars. Or if ever you see, if you look at your veins, right, one vein goes into smaller capillaries, go into smaller and smaller, and then it just kind of branches out. Lightning is a fractal, come down, here, 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 and it spreads out like that. Rivers are fractals, right? So we're seeing these consistent repeating patterns throughout an entire universe. This toroid, while I'm not sure that it's actually a fractal, it does repeat. It shows up a lot everywhere. And I find this fascinating. And what I find very, very fascinating, in fact, is the fact that I can just show you with my hands how an electron moves around an atom. The fact that I can just do that, I think, is really fascinating to me. Like, I find it absolutely fascinating. And I really wonder, like, this, this keeps me up at night sometimes. How far does that mimicry go, right? And so here's the interesting thing, another interesting thing about this. This whole, like, movement here, you see it a lot in Kung Fu. Now I find that very interesting, right? Because when Kung Fu was created, they looked to nature for inspiration. Here's a crane, and somehow it's fending off an alligator by, putting its foot on its snout and jumping away. When cranes fight each other, they use their wings. Oh, okay, we can do that. We can mimic this. We can mimic that, and so on and so forth with mantis and snake and tiger and monkey. All these things, and then it became this whole thing, right? So I really wonder how far that mimicry goes, and, can it be properly made viable? I think so, but only time will really tell, hence the experiments. So how does this whole dimensional thing, right, how does that apply to combat? Well, funny thing, whenever you're talking about classic, traditional fighting wisdom, right, and you're talking about you're punching in a line, right, hey, remember your line, jab cross in your line, boom, come up on the line, dodge the line, right, get off of their line, right, so the idea here is that if done properly, if executed properly, you could come perpendicular to your opponent. Now, there are some strikes that are already doing this, like, like the hook or the uppercut, coming in perpendicular to whatever else is going on, but I really wonder how far that goes, especially if you think about, like, kinesthetically, right? The human body is the weakest on its side. You want to break a knee, you come in at the side. You got a knockout point here. If you punch someone hard enough here, you can kind of cause a brain aneurysm, right? If you want to break an elbow, right, pulling here or pushing here or whatever, you come perpendicular to that, like that's not exactly pleasant. Or like an arm bar, right? Pushing up, right? You're pushing up perpendicular to that arm. So kinesthetically, we're the weakest here. Also, liver shot is a nice way to knock somebody out, So these are the things that really kind of, drive me in this experiment, right? And so there are going to be more videos that I'm going to put out in the future detailing the experiment, getting it out to my peers, like you people who are watching this, to get some feedback, right? Because, it's going to be necessary, right? I've got my work cut out for me. Yeah, I'm attempting to make Kung Fu viable because I don't want to see it die out, right? And especially when it comes down to like just the one thing, like live resistance, man, even here in Charlottesville, I faced a similar problem. Like, I went to different Kung Fu schools, and I'm like, hey, I want to spar, because that's where I learn the most, is through sparring and live resistance, right? And they're like, oh, there are many traditions that we have, but that's not one of them. We're not just going to spar, right? And it's like, why? That's not a tradition we follow. Oh, alright, man. Or they'd be like, sure, you can spar, but you have to be with us for a full year, and you can only use our martial art. It's like, why? What's the point, right? I even when I started training with my Sifu, right? Like when we first started, we were sparring, each other. But it was like, okay, you're gonna get attacked in the street, so grit your teeth, tuck your chin, protect your nuts, and go. And also, don't hurt your sparring partner. You know, so we kind of got that at first. No gloves, no equipment, no mouth guard, nothing. It's like, hey, this is as realistic of a scenario as we can possibly get for training. And then my Sifu and we went to one of our friends who practiced MMA, and we got into a couple of matches there. And like, it was clear to me that my stamina needed a lot of work. I was like 230 pounds at that time, like, of not muscle. So, you know, so while my techniques were decent, I was way out of shape. And then my Sifu, he didn't really have that problem, but, you know, he did fight up against someone who was much taller and much bigger than he was, and he did pretty well, but dude could just, like, grab him. I mean, he was only at chest level, so he just, like, super easy, right? And then after that day, after he lost, really took a blow to his ego. Like, he didn't allow sparring in the group for 2 years, right? He was just like, no, we're done with sparring. And I was like, why? Like, we could use that to learn and grow. You know, at least that's what I was doing. I was like, yeah, I got a bloody nose out of the thing, you know, but like, I learned a lot. And I still learn a lot. So it's this really old tradition, right, that is really holding this martial art back. And so that's something that I'm aiming to change. And yeah, so look forward to more videos in the future, and let me know what you think. So peace, and don't forget to fight for your dreams.